Theology Unplugged.
Welcome to Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and this is session number 30 of Through Theology in a Year. Our special through all of theology, all of systematic theology from beginning to end, trying to get through it in 1 year. And I mean, I'm not saying we're on pace, but it's gonna be at least a year before we get through it, and who knows, maybe a year before we get through this first section called Introduction to Theology, Prolegomena, because you guys know how much I like this. I could spend so much time on this. I mean, I could pause for every one of these and spread them out to 10 sessions, but we need to get through this. We need to see the overview. This is kind of like right in between a big picture forest look and looking at the trees. I'm trying to get mid-range so that we can go through all of systematic theology, kind of see the big picture, and then maybe dig in deeper after that. But we are on session 30, and if you guys need to figure out more about the ministry, more about me, there it is, Patreon. That's where you support me at. If you enjoy what I'm doing, go there. That'd be great, and I'd love to have you as a member. I need you as a member. How's that? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is Postmodernizing the Faith. We're still on postmodernism. And we're going to be on postmodernism until next week at the very least. We'll probably get through it next week because the way I've got it planned out today and next week, but we'll see how it goes tomorrow. Yes, that would be tomorrow. The next session, that is going to be incredibly important for the entirety of the theology program. It's going to answer a lot of questions and really so much to do with Christian epistemology. This does too. This is very interesting because what we're doing is we're looking at how the church, how the evangelical church, or really the church in general across the world has engaged postmoderns. How is it that with this changing culture, with everybody thinking differently than they did before, with a global world culture where people are asking different kinds of questions and just thinking differently, a different ethos that you have in the background of what is going on. How is the church responding to it? And this is really, really important because, especially for those of you who are church leaders or your pastors, because you might be able to place yourself and figure out where it is that you fit in or what it is you agree with or don't agree with. And I'm going to broadly look at the different ways in which people are doing this. Remember last time we ended by talking about the different religious or theological spins on postmodernism. And these, you've got universalism, pluralism, syncretism, and inclusivism. And we ended last time talking about inclusivism and how these things, I hate to put them, all of them, as compromises, because that is kind of showing my hand a little bit. But at the same time, that's the way you may be looking at it. Look at these people compromising the gospel. Look at these people, opting for universalism. Everybody is saved. Look at these people opting for pluralism, that all roads lead to the same place. All religions eventually get to God. Look at this compromising of going to syncretism. Let's just pick what we want. It's a smorgasbord of different options whenever we are trying to choose what kind of Christianity we want, or what kind of Christian do I want to be. And then finally, you have the most popular one within at least conservative evangelical Christianity, which is inclusivism. And that is, inclusivism is distinct from restrictivism or exclusivism. Inclusivism says that the gospel can be revealed. Jesus Christ may reveal himself to other peoples, other nations, because that's what we're dealing with here with the postmodern. They're saying, what do we do with the people who have never heard the gospel? That's a big question of postmoderns, because why? We live in a global culture. It's no longer an isolated community where everything you know is within that community, and that's all you think are there's no more options. But now that we live in a global world, we're asking questions. What about those people on the other side of the world? I can see them, now on a computer screen. I can see them on my phone. I can talk to them. They're not as bad as I thought they were, that kind of stuff. And so you've got inclusivism, which says, yeah, well, there's whole other cultures out there that may have never heard the gospel. No missionary has ever been to them. They've never heard about Jesus Christ, never heard about the cross and his death and resurrection. But at the same time, inclusivism says this, that they can still be saved because Christ can still apply his blood to them as long as they do the best they can. And I ended last time by talking about how Roman Catholicism is explicitly inclusivistic since 1965 at Vatican II. Now, the thing is that I want you to see is that there is a movement. There is change. And whenever you look at this, you may look at change and say change is always bad, especially whenever it comes to the gospel. But here's what you got to understand as well. Sometimes whenever we get new information in our life, we become very rigid in that information. And we become what we would call legalistic, and we're not able to see the big picture, and it takes time for us to see the big picture. A good example would be this. Whenever you were young, your mom and dad taught you to brush your teeth. What time did they tell you to brush your teeth? Well, they said once in the morning and once in the evening. And what kind of toothbrush and what kind of toothpaste? Well, they gave it to me and they showed me how to do it. And, this is how long I'm supposed to spend brushing my teeth, 2 minutes, on the front or 2 minutes on the back, whatever it may be, you got instructions. And immediately to you as a child, those were ironclad. That was the way you do it, period. Somebody else you see doing something different, it doesn't make any sense to you because that's the way mom and dad taught you to do it. Right whenever we learn something, right whenever we're introduced to something, right whenever we have a new concept of something, we normally will become legalistic about that without seeing the big picture and being able to see what things are there that cannot be sacrificed and what things are there just, as placeholders for the way we do it right now, but not necessarily essential for the action. So you might say, well, brushing your teeth, whenever you got older, you began to see, you didn't have to have mom and dad tell you when to do it. And you began to see, hey, I can do it in the afternoon as well, or I can just do it after I eat once a day, or I can use a baking soda, or I can just use a toothpaste, or you may not even believe in those things, because I know people who don't believe in toothpaste anymore, and they just use other things. But in the end, what's the principle? The principle is clean your teeth. The principle is keep your teeth healthy. You want them whenever you grow older. And then you begin to base everything on that principle, however you understand it. And it may involve a toothbrush. It may involve toothpaste. It may involve certain times. But it's different because you begin to loosen your grip on things as you move forward. This is what happens with every movement. You go through the history of the church, and you will see the church developing in its understanding of things. And after it develops, after there's something new introduced, normally you'll have a very rigid form of that introduction, like at the Reformation in the 16th century, whenever you had the introduction of Reformed theology and Calvinism. There was a very rigid view of that, and it's basically all our way or the highway on everything. And then as time goes on, it kind of loosens its grip. It changes a little bit. It morphs. It's not because you are compromising. It's because you are seeing the bigger picture. I see this a lot with something called dispensationalism. We'll get into that way down the road. But in dispensationalism, you have a theory that was introduced in the 20th century, and that theory had a belief about the end times and a belief about certain dispensations, different time period, epochs of time in history and how God worked in them. And at first it was very rigid. Here's how many, there's 7 of them, and here's the chart, here's how it works. But then dispensationalists begin to loosen their grip and begin to be able to see the bigger picture and how it might relate and how they might be wrong on this area. That's how every movement happens. That every movement They write their creed, and then afterwards they begin to evaluate their creed. And sometimes they get stronger in certain areas, and sometimes they begin to loosen their grip in other areas, just like brushing your teeth. The whole reason I introduce this, the main reason I do this today, is because as we move through and start talking about how to respond to postmodernism, I don't want you to automatically think, oh, compromise bad, stay in the way I am right now good. That's same thing as brushing your teeth. You don't compromise on how many times, how many minutes, how many seconds you brush your lower teeth. Why? Because that's just the right way it is. That's the way it was introduced, and if that's the way it was introduced, then that's the way it should stay. That's how we are. That's how human nature is. That's the way we think. So keep that in mind as we go through. I'm not saying compromise is good. I'm not coming at you and saying, hey, whenever we look at these different options on how the church engages with a new world, that anything is good or bad. I'm just saying, evaluate it based upon an understanding that just because it is a change doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. There is development. We'll have to get into this later on. This is a little bit later, not too much later, but we'll talk about different theories of doctrinal development. Can doctrine develop and become, can we become more sure about it, or do we have to go to the earliest version of it in order to hold to true doctrine? It's a big debate in the church. It really is. It's very significant, and it will shape you in every direction. But as we move forward, we're just looking at how the church, how different people within the church, evangelicalism or otherwise, are dealing with postmoderns and still trying to stay relevant to a postmodern world. So we go and we talk about how to lead a horse to water. This comes from a book called Postmodernizing the Faith by Millard Erickson. Postmodernizing the Faith. Now, I'm giving him credit for the illustration because this illustration is what I'm going to use the rest of the time. But at the same time, please understand, his way of using this illustration is a little bit different than mine. So I've taken it and I've adapted it for my own. I've taught through this many times, using this particular illustration many times. I think it's incredibly helpful. I think Postmodernizing the Faith, it was out of print for a while. I don't know if it is anymore, but Postmodernizing the Faith, that is the best book. And I've got a lot of books on postmodernism, a whole lot. I mean, just a whole huge bookshelf full of them. And Postmodernizing the Faith is just a little booklet, and it's the best book I've ever read on this subject because it basically says, here's the way in which we are engaging postmoderns, and it makes you think about it a lot differently and understanding it a lot differently. That's why we're going through this today. So how do you lead a postmodern horse to water? That's the question. So the horse is postmodern, you are the leader, and the water itself is what? It's the message. It's the message. You might say it's the gospel, but let's just say it's the message of Christianity. What we want people to know about Christianity, how do we get them there? Okay? So you've got the horse, you've got the rope, you've got the person who is leading, and you've got the water itself. So let's start with option number one. Option number one is to change the horse. So in this, what you have is you have the horse. We've got a problem with the horse. The horse is postmodern. So if the horse is postmodern, remember last time how we talked about, listen, we became really good as a church at dealing with the old way of doing things. We had apologetics for everything, very rational apologetics. And since we're so good at it, since we got so many books about rational apologetics and how to rationally defend the faith, whether it's against atheism or how we integrate evolution or deny evolution, whatever it may be, we have our answers. So that's kind of the deal. We've gotten good at defending the faith to modernists, the people that went before, the rationalists, the people who had a high value of logic and had a high view of man's ability to come to the right conclusions. So here's what we want. Instead of taking the horse as it is, we say, let's get the horse back to being postmodern. Because if the horse is back to being modern. Because if the horse is modern, then we've got all our apologetics, all our defense of the faith, all the way we present it already taken care of. And so, you kind of under the assumption that being modern is better than being postmodern. It's more correct. And so we make that assumption as well. So what do? What are we going to do here? Well, if we're changing the horse, we want to do this. We want to convince the horse that they're not really postmodern. That's the first thing. Convince the horse that they're not really postmodern. So you look at somebody and somebody says they're postmodern. Somebody says they have a relative view of truth, whatever it may be. Then you begin to say, you know what? You're not really postmodern. At least you're not consistently postmodern. Let me show you how. That's the method. Okay, so you don't want them to think they're postmodern anymore. So what do? You ask them questions that create dilemmas for their postmodern epistemology. So this is the Socratic method. You're asking them, you say, okay, so you say you're postmodern, huh? Well, what do you do in this situation? Whenever you come to a stop sign, do you stop? Well, they say, of course I stop. Why, are you crazy? And they say, why do you stop if you're postmodern? You see how the methodology. Well, because I don't want to get hit. But isn't there no truth out there? Remember, that's kind of this idea that there's no such thing as truth. So you're trying to convince them that there is such a thing as truth. And they say, well, that's in other areas, and there is truth. And whenever I run a stop sign, I am more than likely to get hit. That's truth. Than if I follow the rules of the road. So you say, see, you're not really postmodern. You show them how they can't consistently live as postmoderns. That's the thing. You're trying to show people, hey, listen, I know you think you're postmodern. I know you think truth is relative. I know you think it sounds cool, that kind of stuff. I know you learned this in college and you can interpret things however you want, and everybody can be their own person and have their own mind, and it doesn't have to have any type of intellectual contract with other minds. You can be on your own. But at the same time, what about this? What if I were to come up to you and steal your car, and you said, hey, wait a minute, I need that car. You say, well, I need it too. And they say, but it's mine. And the person says, so what? Who cares? It's not right or wrong, is it? And therefore, it is not really anybody's. It just happens to be closer to you, and you happen to have the keys, and I need a method to get somewhere. So it's my truth at this moment is that I need this car more than you. Even if your truth is that it's my car, it doesn't matter, because your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. Morality is not objective. And if I really need it, if I determine that in my mind, then I'm going to take it. You should be fine. That's kind of the methodology here. You've probably seen this before. You've probably heard people using this methodology in order to kind of change the horse back to being at least a little bit more modern, just not postmodern. To lead them through the history. This is another way you can lead them through a history of thought to show them how postmodern epistemology arose. So it's basically saying, hey, let me show you, kind of like we went through the stage of truth, and you explain to them why it is they reject truth, or culture rejects truth. I think this is more massaging. This is probably the less radical way of approaching somebody that is postmodern, and just saying, let's go through the history of it if you got time. If I could go through it and help you to understand why culture is the way they are today, so that you will be able to better evaluate whether you really want to be there, or whether you want to be in this kind of responsive culture, this culture of despair. Do you really want to be in this with a idea of despair, where there's no real truth we can grab a hold of, and there's no real hope for us, and there's no real way to be certain to any degree to where you would tell other people of this truth? it's kind of it's a disparaging thing. It's an age of despair. You've gotten yourself to an individualistic age where you can't really have the relationships you think you can, because you can't really assume you're relating to other people. Here's how we got here. Do you really want to be here? And that's a way, as long as people understand the history of it, maybe they will rethink it. Okay, another option is to change the rope. Instead of thinking the horse needs to be changed back to being modern so that we can evangelize them, let's change the rope. And what does that mean? Well, that is changing the methodology, how we lead them to water. So beforehand, we used very rigid, modernistic means to get them to the water. Now we're going to allow them to stay postmodern, but we're going to lead them to the water and let the water do the work. The problem is we don't know how to lead you. So let's come up with a methodology on how to get you to the gospel, how to get you to the message of Christianity. What uniqueness does that bring? Well, let's say a seeker-sensitive approach. You may have heard of that before, seeker-sensitive approach to church. And seeker-sensitive approach to church simply means you try to adapt the church to look more familiar. You adapt the church to look more like the world. That's the third one here. Adapt the church to look more like the world. So the church looks drastically different, and so we're scaring people away from the church, therefore scaring people away from the message. Let's do everything we can to make it to where it's a seamless movement from the culture to where we are at church. So seamless. Well, what do? Well, let's start having movies at church. We've got something going on right here in Oklahoma. You may be very, very familiar with it, but it's called Life Church. Life Church is a very seeker-sensitive approach. They have changed the rope. That's the way they opt for it. And they just started a series called At the Movies, which my wife went and acted for. I think she may be in one of them, but it's At the Movies. And so and it's really, really good and well done. I mean, as good as anything you see in Disney World. I don't know if Disney World's any good anymore, but back whenever I went there, 2 decades ago, it was incredible. I couldn't believe the presentation. I couldn't believe the effectiveness of the presentation, how much they put into it. And now let's create a church to where we do things excellent, just like that. We do things better than anybody else. We present the gospel better than anybody else, more creatively, whatever it may be. Like at Life Church, if you were to go there, I don't know what it's like right now, but usually whenever you go there, like whenever they did Toy Story, there were just massive Toy Story props everywhere. I mean, look like the best Toy Story props you've ever seen, and little games they had made for it. It was just crazy. But here's a seamless approach. You're walking from the world into the culture, from the culture into the church, and you're not shocked. You're not blown away. It may be something as simple as using PowerPoint presentations or more illustrations. Maybe that's kind of an in-between on the seeker-sensitive approach. You may not be able to go all out, but at least I can put up PowerPoints. We didn't used to do that, and whatever it may be, more visual in our presentation. Now, that's interesting because I just gave you the seeker-sensitive approach where you're sensitive and you're trying to make a seamless approach from the world to the church. However, in postmodernism, there is also a big movement to make it a greater chasm. Instead of you walking in, and whenever you go to church, it just feels like Walmart. It just feels like the movies. It just feels like Disney World. I want it to feel completely different, to where you are shocked and you're coming to something different. That is another approach. And so people will say, create the church to look like the church, not like the world. Make sure that people, whenever they engage with the gospel, they are engaging something different. That's, again, another approach. So you have adapt the church to look less familiar. Make the church building look more traditional. Elevate the stage rather than lowering the stage. Use even an ancient liturgy of some sort. You can do it by using incense, doing a liturgy that is a congregational reading, going back to the old hymns, that kind of thing. Whatever it may be, some people opt and say the best thing we can do for the postmodern, the best way we can change the rope, the most attractive we can be to a postmodern world is to look very, very different, because the people don't want the same old, same old. So two completely different approaches to lead a postmodern horse to the message of the gospel. Another way you may be able to look at it is this: whenever you're changing the rope, instead of preaching from Paul's epistles, because Paul's epistles, what are they? Paul's structured book of Romans, most logical, structured book in the New Testament. I mean, it's basically a systematic theology in and of itself. So we don't want to do that because we're not in a rational world anymore. We're not in a logical world. It's not the way they think. It's not the way they learn. It's not what attracts them. So whenever you come to Paul, it's kind of boring. They're not trying to find the assurance that Paul tries to give as he builds his rational case in his didactic literature. Whenever he writes a letter, from beginning to end, it's very structured. It has an argument. Now we move to, instead of the didactic literature, let's move to a gospel. Let's move to a narrative. Let's start teaching just from stories. This is a big way in which people are leading the postmodern horse to the message of the gospel, is saying, let's do it through stories now. People relate better to something that is relational. Paul's logic is not relational, but telling the story of Christ, telling the stories of the Old Testament, that kind of stuff. Another thing that's in the same vein is preaching from the book of Ecclesiastes. Many people say that Ecclesiastes, that book, was the book written for postmoderns. And if you read through it and see the attitude of the writer of Ecclesiastes, probably Solomon, whenever you're watching him, whenever you're looking at him, he is very different. He's very discouraged. It seems to be that he's in an age of despair. It seems to be that he has gone around the world and understood it in such a way, almost like the history that we've gone through of epistemology. He's gone through and tried to find hope in many things, and in the end, he throws up his hands, and he doesn't have many options, and he doesn't have things that he trusts anymore. He doesn't have things that he sees the same way. He's tried everything, nothing new under the sun, nothing's really good. Here's the best you can do, that kind of thing. That's a relational. That's a mixture of the didactic and relational, where you're teaching somebody something, but at the same time, it's very, very relational because you find yourself in the book of Solomon. You find yourself the book of Ecclesiastes. You find yourself relating very much to Solomon. So that's another, that's changing the rope. Okay, what's next? Well, next we can change the leader. Change the leader. What does this look like? Well, the leader. Who is that? That is you. Okay, that could be the pastor, it could be you. But changing the leader is where you take the different characteristics of the leader and you focus on like relational evangelism. You're the one, you're building a relationship, so you're changing yourself. You preach the gospel when necessary, use words, as St. Francis of Assisi said. Preach the gospel when necessary, use words. Although he didn't really say that, but it's attributed to him, and it's like him. Trust me. Create safe spaces where people can express their problems and doubts. Live authentically. This is for you. This is different. This is where you say, I'm going to be real. Okay, in order to reach this postmodern, I need to be translucent. I need to be authentic. I need to be transparent in everything that I go through, all the problems that I have, all the doubts that I have myself. Relational. It's changing yourself. It's not, you have all the answers, come over here and check me out because my life is perfect. And since my life is perfect, you should be attracted to the message of my life It's that my life is broken, I'm messed up, but at the same time, I still find hope. So what do? You live authentically. You serve others. You listen more than you speak. You be present at important times in people's lives because that's what they remember. They remember who was there whenever somebody died, who stayed by their side. And then after they remember this, after they figure this out, that's whenever they decide to listen to you, even though it is all happening subconsciously, because they live in a world where they doubt authenticity, they doubt sincerity, they doubt any type of certainty that can be drawn from that. And so as long as you are authentic, the more authentic you are, the more effective you're going to be in being able to preach Christ and tell people about the gospel. Okay, so what's next? Well, the last one here is change the water. Now, I'm going to use this in a negative way right now, and I want you to understand why, because next week we'll talk about it a little bit differently. But at first, I'm saying change the water. The other ones you may have said, I get it. I understand some of that stuff. That makes sense. And maybe we do that. Maybe we do change our methodology in the rope. And yes, we're supposed to be authentic. So all those things you could probably find good too. Now, whenever I present this one, I'm going to present it at least for you evangelicals like me. You're probably going to be very allergic to it at first. Okay. And I don't mind that at all. You need to evaluate it. But at the same time, I'm going to say next week a different type of water change as well. So the first thing here is you change water, and people are doing this. You will notice that a lot of people are doing this. They're changing the water. And remember, just because you change the water doesn't mean it's bad. Maybe the water was bad. Maybe remember whenever we were brushing our teeth and we only used Colgate toothpaste and we only used Colgate toothbrushes, and that's it. That was part of our doctrinal statement. Well, later on, we was like, oh, yeah, I guess you can use Crest. I guess you can use whatever, So that's a change too. That's what I'm talking about as well. So I'm not necessarily saying change from something that we know is correct, but it's changed from something. It's reevaluating the traditions that we've been handed and saying maybe we got it wrong. Okay, so think of it positively like that. Even though the examples I'm going to give, you're probably going to be allergic to. So what do? Well, in order to change the water, to make it, remember, changing the water is to make it to where it's more tasty, it's more satisfying, it's more refreshing. It's what you actually need rather than, a caffeinated drink. It's actually water that'll hydrate you. So make it to where it hydrates you more spiritually. And what do? Well, maybe you make the doctrine of hell optional or change the doctrine of hell. Maybe you rethink that and you say, hey, listen, here's the deal. The world right now is not it was a lot easier beforehand to accept the doctrine of hell whenever you were in your small communities and you didn't know these people. But now that we know them, believing in hell is just more untenable. It's harder. It's more emotionally jarring. And so therefore, maybe we rethink hell. Maybe hell doesn't exist. Maybe it's annihilated. Maybe universalism is happening. That's whenever you get to the what we talked about last time. Or maybe you change the atonement because the atonement's really hard. And you see this quite a bit in the church today. Changing the atonement means that you look at the atonement and you say, here's the evangelical traditional Protestant Catholic view, is that God's wrath came down upon his son and he punished his son for our sins. And you say, people are starting to question that and say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would God be so mad at Christ? Why would he require this kind of sacrifice? Isn't this cosmic child abuse? So you see those kind of things going around because people are rethinking. And so therefore, in postmodernism, what people are doing is they're changing the water and they're getting maybe a few of these things out that don't belong there, at least according to them. Just views on sexuality. Maybe we've got it wrong. Maybe it's just traditions we have been handed. And if the culture says I cannot go to church because they do not accept same-sex lifestyle, then let's get rid of the same-sex lifestyle. Is it really that important? Even if it is wrong, maybe it's not that important. That's the changing of the water. It's filtering it out sometimes. Stay away from the Old Testament. That's another thing. You see this today a lot. People are staying away from the Old Testament because God in the Old Testament just seems like a different God, and we can't answer why it is or how it is that you have him commanding the genocide of entire nations. And so instead of, we just say, hey, listen, that's the way he did things back then, and today, that's not the way he does things. Maybe even adopt for some type of process view of God where God has grown. He has grown in his understanding. He is changing. So all the kinds of stuff like emphasize social justice, emphasize the different aspects of the gospel, the what we are to do to change the world, because people want the world changed. They see injustice everywhere. We see it everywhere. Therefore, make Christianity's main motive not to get people to repent of sins and get their sin problem taken care of, but get the sin of the world washed away. Get rid of it, change it. So the Christianity is about changing the world, making it better. That's the main message we have, not Christ and the atonement. So you see how it's just changing things. Downplay the role of rational apologetics, maybe. We usually go out into the world, and what we're doing is we're defending our faith and telling everybody, here's why it's right, here's why you have to believe it. But now, rational apologetics maybe doesn't appeal to anybody, even if we can make our case, even if we can show that they're inconsistent if they don't accept it. That's not the issue. The issue is they don't believe in your view of rationality anymore because they don't trust you. They don't trust anybody. So therefore, let's get rid of that water that has all this logical, rational apologetics in it. So those are the four options. And I know that there's so much to think about and discuss with these four options. And we're going to translate into next week or next time, tomorrow, whenever we talk about the Christian view of truth. And I want you to see it in light of what we have talked about here, because there's going to be a delicate approach that we take. And it's not just to have a delicate approach. I think you'll see this historically. I'm going to go through some history of the church and how the church has been either one side or another, either very relational or very logical, or very, very heartfelt or very mind-felt, and how those two come together and really represent what Christianity is supposed to be, and how we are, whatever we do to engage a postmodern world, what we cannot sacrifice and what we can sacrifice. What things can we question again? Well, we need to question things. Even the most fundamental doctrines that we have, the reformers, whenever they reformed the church in the 16th century, they said, not only has the church reformed, but it is always reforming. Reformanda semper reformanda. Reformed and always reforming. And they said, keep on reforming, always. And so you and I personally have to always be thinking through these things again, and not assuming that we got the right amount of strokes that we're supposed to use to brush our teeth, or using the right toothpaste. We're always getting better and better based upon the principle. And so that is what I want us to move into next week thinking about. Tomorrow thinking about. So I hope you enjoyed this session. I hope it was informative. I know I went a little bit over here. There's a lot of things to talk about there, but it's interesting, isn't it? Remember, Postmodernizing the Faith by Millard Erickson. If you're looking for a book, I should have put it in the description there, but I'm not even sure if it's being published anymore, but I'm sure you can find it used somewhere. Postmodernizing the Faith. I promise, if you want to get more into this, what we talked about here specifically, and the different options, and it's not a big book, it's quick, easy read, do that. Also, please think about becoming a patron. Again, that is the way I support myself. If you believe in what I'm doing, you like it, you want me to keep on doing it, you want to see this all the time, then go over to Patreon and become a member. If you can't become a member, just follow. You'll see what's going on with me and with the ministry as we keep on growing. We got all kinds of big plans in the future. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow.
Theology